Hey y'all, it's Nikki. I have to tell you about Tecovas boots. I finally have a pair, and they are handmade, high quality, stylish, comfortable, and I even got them customized with leather stamping. So go get yours at the Tecovas flagship on South Congress or their store at the Domain. Plus, good news, Tecovas is opening a brand new store for your Western wear needs on Main Street in Georgetown. Swing by for their grand opening party September 27th through 29th for live music and freebies for the first 50 of y'all to get there. So come shop with me at Tecovas. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, Austin touts itself as the live music capital of the world, but for years, there was no safety net for the artists who bring that title to life. Things are better now, thanks to the dozens of local organizations that help musicians survive and thrive. So we're talking to Patrick Bukta with the Austin Music Foundation about how his group organizes its 6,000 members to make musicians' lives here better. This is the last of 5 episodes about the music community in Austin, brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tecovas. Tecovas knows more than handmade boots and fine Western wear. They also have got an ear for great music. From legends of the past to rising stars on the scene, we love supporting musicians and music fans right here in our hometown of Austin. So if you're headed out for a good time on the stage or in the crowd, go in good boots from Tecovas. Oh, and one more thing. Stay tuned at the end of the episode for a sponsored segment, A Mile in Their Boots, where we uncover the unsung heroes of Austin, brought to you by our launch sponsor, Tecovas. It's Wednesday, September 18th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I am here with Patrick Bukta, CEO of Austin, Texas Musicians, and a fellow musician in the Austin area. Hi, Pat. How are you?
Hey, Nikki. Good to see you, my friend.
Oh my gosh, so good to see you. So I want to dive right in. What did music mean to you as a child? I know your grandfather especially had a huge impact.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I loved music ever since I can remember. I'm one of those kids that was raised on the Beatles and all that. But I think I really connected with music because my grandfather, who didn't speak English, that was our language of connection, because he was, kind of this tough farmer guy in Angleton, Texas. And, I was born with a rare liver disease. It's called primary sclerosing cholangitis. And I was this sickly, weak little kid, had all many, grandkids. And so, our only real connection was that he played music and I was very interested in music. I think when I was in 5th or 6th grade, my mom pulled me out of school for 2 weeks to go apprentice with my grandmother to learn how to make kolaches, the old school way, right? But I got to hang out with my grandfather for 2 weeks. And, since he couldn't really communicate with me through English, we just, he'd play guitar, and I'd learned to play guitar. And he gave me a harmonica that, he mostly played polka and the old cowboy songs and stuff like that. But that's where it all started.
Now tell me, what language did your grandfather speak?
Czech.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, we're Czech. But a specific dialect of Czech, I think he's more Moravian. So my grandparents came over in the early 1900s to America.
My parents started taking me to concerts when I was like a baby.
Awesome.
I think there's something really special about just from the beginning having music in your life.
Yeah.
It kind of changes you. So you moved to Austin in 1991 to play professionally.
That's right.
What was the Austin music scene back then?
Back then, music was, music is still everywhere, but I think it was really concentrated back then along 6th Street, and we don't see that as much now on 6th Street, but, you had your clubs like Steamboat, Jazz, Babes, 311 Club. I don't know if you remember some of this stuff.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And Toulouse and all that stuff. And
Oh man,
right,
Toulouse.
remember that
Yeah.
one? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mercury, what the White Rabbit, and
Oh my God. Yeah.
uh, of course, there's still some great venues down there that I used to play at back then, like the Flamingo Cantina and places like that that are still going strong. We had a strong music scene, but we did not have the community that we have now. We didn't have. We probably had the diversity, but they weren't getting the same opportunities. I think that we're prioritizing at least now. So
Right.
I think we have a lot more community and a lot more resources available for musicians now than ever.
When I think about the early 90s, I think about there was music every night. It seemed like there was just like a plethora of opportunities. You could go anytime, any day of the week, and you could hear music. And for some reason, I equated that with meaning there was plenty of opportunity for everybody, and there was this like equal playing field. But I guess that does not make that. It's not the case, I guess.
Back then, different genres like Latin music wasn't, they weren't getting on the same stages as a lot of other stuff.
Right.
You had your MC Overlord and you had, Dirty Worms and stuff like that, but we didn't really have the hip hop scene that we have now, right? Which is really amazing. But I feel like there's a lot more variety now, and we want to make sure that a lot of these different genres are more prominently featured and lifted up and given places to actually showcase.
Why did you feel the need to help other musicians? Like, because I think sometimes there is this misunderstanding that there's a competition, like that you're
Mhm.
competing for gigs and tips, and that
Sure.
that ATX musicians are less of a community than they actually are, because it is a really, really tight community. So can you speak a little bit about why you felt the need to, help others?
Absolutely. As a kid, I spent most of my childhood in a hospital bed. I was a little better in high school, but then it came, coming back real hard. And so I managed to graduate college and move down to Austin. But then I got sick again, and I got sicker and sicker and had to go on disability at that time. I actually, I graduated from film school and I had jobs ready to go with Robert Rodriguez, Richard Linklater, all this stuff. I was ready to roll, and I couldn't do it, and it was devastating. And so I lost, a lot of hope and faith at that time, and lost my path. And I got to this point where I had my final bleed out, and I was listed for transplant. This was 2009. And I realized at that point that my life had to have some sort of meaning. And this is not uncommon with transplant patients, but the second I woke up, I realized that somebody quite literally, in order for me to live, somebody else had to die, and you have this very heavy sense of responsibility and to pay it forward after an experience like that. But for me, it was a matter of finding out where I fit in.
After your transplant, you reemerged into the Austin music scene,
Mhm.
and so let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what did it mean to you at that point in your life?
I did a lot of that work at KVU, but when this opportunity came up, I saw this as just really the perfect area for me to make a difference, because I'll get a little heady here for a second, but music is so fundamental to who we are as human beings, as living creatures, the sounds, the vibrations, the frequencies that just really create the human experience. Language is formed out of, musical sort of melodies that we first came up with as early human beings, right? And so music is just fundamental. It's a part of our DNA. And on that very token, I've worked in the corporate world for 30 years, and musicians are often looked upon as hobbyists, as, oh, that's cool that you do music, but it's really not that important to society, is it?
Oh my God, yes.
When it's the most important thing, it's one of the most important things we have as humans. And so, changing the paradigm, changing the mindset around the fact that musicians are a valuable working force. We are a working class that contribute just as much economically to society as anybody else. And that data can actually be measured.
So when you dipped your foot back into music, like what was that? When were you like, okay, I want to go back?
I'll tell you exactly when it happened, because I had my transplant in 2012, and it was the next year that I believe I had brought a couple of friends onto a show at KView. This was to talk about women in music and interview them about women in country music. One of those people was Jenny Parrott.
One of the best voices in the city, sweet little baby angel.
I know, yeah. And so she brought me on her little variety show and had me play some music. And this was the first time I had been back on stage in years and years and years. And the spark just hit me, and I knew then that I needed to be back doing what I love. I mean, I think in some ways it was just like riding a bike. But I think also when you take breaks from pursuits like that, whether it's artistic or athletic or things like that, you come back with a different understanding, and you're better often, and like, because you have a different perspective after having taken that break. The community was different. The community had grown and had become more diverse. But also our city had changed since I kind of stopped doing music in the early 2000s. The city, everything changed, as you know.
Completely different by 2012, 2013. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the need was different too. And I realized there was a very different need for musicians than existed, back then. And that's where I started to find my place within the community.
Yeah. And to that point, you're a huge advocate for musicians in Austin. As someone that is boots on the ground advocating, what are the biggest challenges that Austin musicians face these days?
The live music capital of the world sort of title has been both a blessing and a curse, right? But I will say that having that title holds us accountable, makes us have to live up to it, right? Which is not a bad thing. And also, I would say anytime somebody challenges that title, I would point out the fact that nowhere else in the world exists the community that we have here, the resource. Nowhere else do we have a HAM that offers healthcare services for musicians, a SIMS for mental health care, and us, advocating to create, the first ever sustainable public funding for music in the U.S. through hotel occupancy taxes, a city standard pay rate for musicians. All these things don't exist anywhere else. But as far as the challenges that musicians face, I mean, I think on a local level, I don't think we have to tell anybody it's harder than ever to live and work in Austin, Texas. The venue fees, performance fees, haven't really changed since the 80s.
Right.
Which is crazy. You're still making about the same amount of money as you did back then. And then on top of all that, on the federal level, we're talking about, 20 years ago, you could get out and make some money selling CDs, selling direct to consumer music. And now all of that's undercut by, the streaming services where, Spotify pays 0.00004 cents per stream. And now they're even changing that so you don't get paid for less than 1,000 streams. It used to be that people paid musicians for their music, and now musicians have to pay for people to hear their music.
I think the other thing that has changed over time has kind of been like the way we figure out accessibility, like how, like
Yes.
not just us having access to musicians, but musicians having access to audiences.
You are so correct. Yeah.
So, like, how have you seen that play out in Austin up to now?
I don't know if you remember Yashi Vaughn. I had a little band with her, and she was living with Everett Mullins at the time, and all those jazz guys would come over, and like Brian Mendez was in that band, and I was writing for the group, and I was so like outclassed like I had no business being in that room playing with those guys. We used to rent a room at the music lab off of Krebs when they were the first location.
Yep.
Those things don't exist now, where musicians can kind of have that communal space, get together and create.
So 2019, you and others created the Austin, Texas Musicians.
Yep.
And tell us a little bit about you and the other musicians, like why you thought you needed to start this group.
Yeah, well, our dear friend Nakia.
Nakia is a singer-songwriter based in Austin, been in Austin for years, just incredibly talented.
Yeah, 2008 was a big year for him because he started our private original Austin, Texas Musicians Facebook group that's up to about 6,000 members. And he was also on the first season of The Voice that year. As the community grew within the Facebook group, and as the need grew, finally there was this call to, go storm the castle, go demand what we need and things like that. And we organized as a 501c4 nonprofit, a political organization. But our first project was literally to just start getting musicians together to show up at City Hall and lobby City Council to create what we now call the Live Music Fund. Back in 2017, they created this recommendation to pull a portion of hotel occupancy taxes to create a fund for music, with the argument being that, musicians are the whole brand of this city has been built on the backs of musicians.
Right.
And it wasn't that hard an argument to make with council, but we had it put on a bond vote in November of 2019. And that night, Mayor Adler told us, he was like, the only reason you guys got this is because musicians actually showed up to vote. And we realized then that musicians actually make up the largest voting bloc in the city.
Yeah, that is some serious power. I mean, and one might say for a place like Austin, we are an entertainment city.
Big time.
That is what we stand on the mountaintops and say that we are. So
exactly.
Your musicians are a part of your bread and butter. You guys have also been involved in coming up with some other big solutions to challenges and groundbreaking ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, where do the ideas come from? But also, like, how did you get people to get it? Like, how do you get people to get out and vote?
The ideas come directly from the street level up. So we have a 30-member musicians advisory panel made up from every diverse community, genre, council district. And, out of that, these folks, ever since the very beginning, they kind of do the deep listening within their communities. They kind of report up and let us know, where the need is, what's going on. Just a few years ago, we learned that, from our women musicians, that women, LGBTQIA plus musicians and other types of musicians are often at risk leaving downtown gigs. They're not safe. And so out of that, we were able to create a program called Gig Buddy with the Downtown Austin Alliance that provides safe cartage, escort, and setup to and from gigs.
I love that. Oh my God.
Yeah. So those types of things, are really where we do that deep listening in the communities and then turn that need into action. We actually have a training coming up where our staff will be training volunteer deputy registrars to go out and register voters at their gigs.
So we start the Live Music Fund.
Yeah.
And then things happen quickly. They, got the funding, then it was the pandemic.
Yeah. Oh.
and then the winter storm, and y'all come in, you save the day.
Well, I think after the pandemic, we're still feeling the effects of that. I was just talking to a friend yesterday about how his business, Good Wolf Live Entertainment, is still just kind of learning how to even out and find our place. We're just finally getting our heads above water to where we can catch our breath. But what we've realized is that, education, preservation, and advocacy are really the three pillars that we stand on. We had done the Live Music Fund. We got that thing done, and then we got our musicians advisory panel online at the beginning of 2020, and we thought, well, we kind of know how 2020 is going to roll, and we're looking at how to do things, and then all of a sudden, bam, everything changed. And but pretty immediately, we got to work with council and the Music Cares, the chapter of the Grammys Recording Academy, to create the Austin Music Disaster Relief Fund, and worked very closely with EDD and with our musician community to make sure everybody was able to apply. And in the end, we ended up getting $5 million out to venues and six million out to musicians, and that was hard work.
Wow.
We formed some key partnerships with the Texas Workforce Commission to get our musicians to skip the line and get ahead and get their unemployment benefits, and with Workforce Solutions for income opportunities to get everybody by. And that was 2020. It was crazy, but like you said, then as if we hadn't had enough, then we get smacked with the winter storm. And yeah,
during that winter storm, a lot of musicians, a lot of event workers, we worked together at, the Millennium Youth Complex for just like helping people get water, basic needs during that storm. And it was one of the most organized efforts I've ever seen.
Man, it was as that week was getting a little later and things started to thaw out. Councilmember Natasha Harper Madison texted me at like 1 a.m. on a Thursday night, and she's like, "Look, I got all this food and water coming in, and we don't have anybody there to deliver it in the morning." And overnight, just that quickly, we were able to mobilize.
It really speaks to just like another way how musicians and entertainment and service industry is just the backbone of this city.
Yeah. Folks have told me that is the largest volunteer emergency response effort the city's ever seen. 500 unemployed musicians, venue and event workers. It was really inspiring to see. It was crazy, but musicians are wired a little differently, right? We are here to doing this work because we want to give something back to people. And,
right.
We're not just asking for help, we're giving it too.
It was incredible. So
yeah, truly.
I could gush about that all day.
Same, yeah.
In 2023, the city of Austin approved a new uniform pay rate scale for musicians at city-led music events.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about how big of a deal this was?
This was created, by Stephanie Bergara about a year before that. She kind of created this idea that musicians should be paid kind of a standard rate. But this was not adopted all across the city. And I think the rate at that time was $150. So what we did, we saw the need there. We saw that really this should apply all across the city for all city-sponsored performances. Our advocacy and education director wrote the resolution. We brought it to council. And again, that was a unanimous vote. And there we have it. So now, that $200 city standard pay rate applies all across the board to all city-funded, city-sponsored performances.
Do you think it affected even how musicians viewed their own worth?
Absolutely. We always want musicians to understand their own worth and their own value, because, we all kind of get graded on that bell curve, right?
So most musicians that I know, maybe I'll just say myself, the whole time I have always had a day job. Always.
Yeah.
And I've had, sing at night or on the weekends or whatever. I know a large majority of musicians that are, do the same thing.
Oh yeah.
But there are also a lot of musicians that this is it. This is what they do. They are career musicians. Can we talk a little bit about why it's so important, or why we need to create organizations and music funds to ensure that they survive? And because, you'll hear people that will say, Why can't they do it on their own? Why is it the city's job?
Well, absolutely. And I do see that sentiment sometimes where folks are saying, like, well, why should musicians get the help? Do you want to live in a world without music? It's harder to be a musician now than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The entire industry has changed. So it's an uphill battle just to even make music now. We need to see, increased funding for the Live Music Fund. We're sourcing from hotel occupancy taxes, but I'd love to start working towards some public-private partnership to grow that fund, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be one of our big priorities this next year is going out and kind of knocking on those and making sure that they're invested in this community, because if all of a sudden we don't have music in this community, then we're not going to have much of a corporate presence in this community either.
Are there any other cities that you feel like come close to taking care of their musicians in a way that we don't, or that maybe have good ideas that you think Austin could kind of, tap into?
Yeah, absolutely. Like in New Orleans, they have some great initiatives for musicians to own homes. There's the Ellis Marcellus Musicians Village, which is, they have a central hub that's got a recording studio, performance space, classrooms, but around it, they offer, affordable housing for musicians to buy homes at around $75,000. That has really created this tight little musicians community.
I love that. I love Austin. Okay, I hope y'all are paying attention. Like we're talking about a musician's village.
Yeah,
I love this where there's an opportunity to be able to buy your own house in Austin is like a game changer.
there's all sorts of great things going on, but I'll tell you this too. When I take music meetings in New York and LA and stuff, and I tell them about the stuff we're doing down here, they're like, "What? What? We never even thought about tapping into hot taxes to create funds for musicians. We never even thought about creating a musician pay rate."
Oh my gosh. So tell me what you have going on right now. I know you got some exciting things that are happening. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, one of the cool projects, and I think one of the really satisfying projects we're involved in right now, the Texas Music Museum, which is on East 11th. I know you've probably driven by it a million times, as I did, but I didn't realize the depth of their archive of Texas music. They've got this really deep archive, even of East Austin musicians, Black and Latin musicians, going back, and all Texas musicians going back over 100 years. This is the deepest archive of Texas music anywhere. They even have a deep archive of Czech music for, bohemians like me. And this is all music that happened here in Texas. And they're in a tiny little 2,000 square foot space. And I think their storage issue of, their vast archive that's currently in APD storage, but they're about to lose that lease. But as far as the long-term solution, we're hoping to maybe get them into the development happening on Block 16 and 18.
I mean, it makes sense. Where else would it be? That's the most. It seems like that's the smartest place to have it.
And I would think they're chronicling all this East Side music history, so it should remain on the East Side. But you go into that place and you realize that Texas, anywhere on this planet Earth, Texas has the most diverse array of music that has come out of this state. Anywhere. And it's really inspiring to see, and we need to preserve that history.
Is there anything else that I've missed that's going on or that's coming up that you want to talk about?
Well, I guess one of the important things, everything's been on such a positive note. One thing that's coming up is we're running out of money and we could use some help. We want to be able to remain sustainable so that we can continue to help musicians, not just here, but all across the state and all across the country. And I'm saying this as humbly as I can. I don't like to brag, but we have made a real difference in the lives of musicians here, and we want to be able to continue this work.
How would you quantify the assistance that Austin, Texas musicians have provided to local musicians? How would you quantify that?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think the fact that musicians are getting gigs and getting a pay rate that they can depend on. I think the fact that musicians can now access these grants of, now $15,000 to $30,000 grants that never existed before and don't exist anywhere else. Things like that, I think, are huge. And there's probably a million more that I'm not even thinking of right now. But it seems like we've done so much work these last few years. But these things are very measurable and very quantifiable, and they're also we really prioritize equity so that we make sure that musicians, LGBTQI plus, BIPOC, disabled musicians have the access and the opportunities that maybe they weren't given before, and that's really, really important to us.
And to your point earlier, you have 6,000 people in your Facebook group that you're help giving a voice. So that's dope. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Nikki. We really appreciate your time and having us on. Thank you.
Next up, let's join executive producer Eva Ruth Moravec in Walking a Mile in Professor Kathleen McElroy's boots, brought to you by our launch sponsor, Tecovas.
Hello, I'm Eva Ruth Moravec, executive producer of CityCast Austin, here with Dr. Kathleen McElroy, a professor at the University of Texas at Austin in the journalism school. So, first off, Kathleen, tell me, who are you?
I am a 65-year-old Black woman who could lose a few pounds, but, I'm just happy to be dry, above ground, fed. I got a lot to be thankful for.
Tennis star?
Not a tennis star. In fact, I am so terrible at it. But my tennis team is called the Altheas. And I was one of the co-founders of it. But now it's just full of all these amazing women who've created a social life for me, yet another avenue to be with people. So Altheas for Althea Gibson.
And tell me, what is your job?
I am a professor at the School of Journalism and Media. This semester, I'm teaching food journalism and sports media practicum, which is a fancy way of saying I'm teaching the students, or we're doing projects about 2 tennis tournaments that are in town here. Global tournaments held here in Austin, and the students are going to do all the communication, video, social media, on-court announcing, post-match interviews, and we're also doing a podcast and video on the revival of the A&M UT football game.
Ooh, we'll have to tune in. And how did you get into this line of work? What drew you to journalism?
My dad was a journalist, so I've always known about journalism. Even though I'm such an advocate for people who didn't grow up in the atmosphere or the background that I have. But I knew from 4th grade that I wanted to be a sports journalist, and that kind of happened. It was just kind of weird. But then after being in the business for so long, I decided I needed to be back in Texas, or I was just tired of I was living in New York City in a very expensive studio apartment, but I had a doorman, going home and watching Dance Moms. Now, that's kind of sad and pathetic. When you're no longer going to theater and things like that, then why are you living in the West Village and watching Dance Moms? So I decided to move back to Texas because all my family's here, and I decided to get a PhD. And after getting the PhD, I eventually ended up back in Austin, and that's why I'm teaching here.
So let's walk a mile in your boots. Tell us, what do you do in an average day?
In an average day, well, I listen to sports radio, and I know that's kind of crazy, but it's a habit that I got into in New York. And then I read as many publications as I can on my phone while eating breakfast. And then I often go to campus. I don't like driving. In fact, I realized that's why I ended up in New York. So I live downtown now, and I catch the bus to campus and back because our building is right by a bus stop. So then I spend time on campus and try to teach the students something, but they know everything. I'm just a Yoda.
Why does your work matter to Austin?
I think it matters to the state in that we're trying to produce an atmosphere in which students become committed citizens who are willing to learn new things. So I don't have to teach them a specific X, Y, and Z, but I can teach them that they can always be lifelong learners. And a lot of these people want to stay in Austin, even though it's 108 degrees a lot of times. But I think that's why it matters to the state.
And why does it matter to you?
Because when they get it, or when they come back and tell you later that, that thing you said that I might be able to do, I did it. And thank you so much for believing in me. It means so much when the students say that.
And at the end of your work day or work week, where do you go to relax in Austin and have fun?
Well, you know what? That is a good question. I take suggestions because, like in Houston, there are lots of places where people my age and race can go, but in Austin, I don't think there are that many. So I end up doing a lot of cooking myself. I love to cook. I have like 300 cookbooks and stuff like that. So I end up relaxing and watching a lot of, sad to say, HGTV, Food Network, lots of tennis on TV, and lots of sports in general. So, but I live by the hike and bike trail. So yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for being here with us.
And thank you for having me.
Check out our show notes to find more about Kathleen McElroy and her amazing work. And we'll have that link just a click away. So thanks for listening. And thanks again to Tecovas for sponsoring this interview.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Pat and Kathleen's social media in our show notes. By the way, we've had a great time showcasing Austin's music scene for our Austin in Stereo series. And you can find links to all 4 of our previous episodes in our show notes. We had a blast hearing from our featured musicians at our party at the Tecovas on South Congress last week. We heard first from Julie Bouchard, who has an angelic voice and writes songs about Love Island characters.
I need to stop following my heart when my head knows that it's wrong. Stop following these feelings leading down to same sad songs.
Then Alex Marrero, a singer, songwriter, drummer, and instructor who's performed with all kinds of bands.
La tierra que me vio nacer, cuando yo te vuelva a ver. La tierra que me vio nacer, cuando yo te vuelva a ver.
And finally, Susanna Choffel, a lifelong Austinite who first played at Saxon Pub at 14 and just released her 4th album.
Bird by bird and stone by stone, we can piece this world together. You don't have to be alone.
We also want to give a special shout out to Michael Murphy. We're so grateful to everyone who performed and came out, and we sure hope you're all loving your new boots and Western wear. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.